mechanism for grants being canceled. There is that link there to that assessment that I mentioned, and that'll be at the end as well. And we'll share out these slides if you wanted to do it for yourself. Noel had some additional research on which grants this is most likely to impact, based on sort of some of the legal ways that they're being challenged.
Yeah. So, one thing to keep in mind, the reason why this phrase or this clause has um, really kind of been the center around this vulnerability assessment, I think, is um, one thing that Scott Scheffler talked about in the presentation that I had reviewed, or I'll be reviewing a little bit later, is that this language of um, the terms and conditions associated with the federal awards between 2020 and 2024 was there was this specific language in the terms and conditions that says that the grant award must effectuate the program goals or agency priorities. So because that clause was added between 2020 and 2024, it's really easy now for them to just go ahead and pick the programs that have those that clause in the terms and conditions and say, well, that clause, your program or your award no longer effectuates the program goals or agency priorities. Now, this clause was not included in federal awards terms and conditions
Did
before
not. Nobody was
2020.
here yesterday, really. So it was kind of lame. And yeah, we'll have to retry it. Yeah, it was like 12:15. I'm like, oh yeah, but nobody was really around.
Kevin, would
So
you mind muting her?
yeah, we'll have to do it. It was a beautiful day though. But
Sorry about that. So the clause is not included in the federal awards terms and conditions before 2020, and the new uniform grant guidance actually decided to remove that language for starting in 2025. So really, the federal awards that are issued between that 4 year period of 2020 to 2024 are much more likely to be terminated for this reason, other than other beyond other reasons. Because and I'll go into like the three ways that a grant can be terminated a little bit later, based off of my review. But I just wanted to go ahead and add that. Sorry about that little
No,
interruption.
that's super. That's helpful. That's not to say that they're not going to find other ways to cancel grants. This is just the most convenient one because you can say our agency priorities have changed. This may have been in line with previous priorities, but no longer is. And so that's kind of the clause that they use. So if you want to jump to the next slide, so what can kind of agencies do in the short term? According to Tanya, sort of, um, I think a lot of agencies, I know the agency that I'm worked for is seeing a lot of increased compliance scrutiny around federal grants. We have people asking to tell us all of this extra information we haven't been asked for before. So I think proactively sort of anticipating for that, shoring up your procedures, being ready for that, drawing down anything that you can while you can. If the portal's up and going and you're able to draw on it, get them in there. And then I think looking at your programs and what can be kept, changed, or cut. So one thing that we can talk about is sort of the storytelling around this. We've seen some of these words and these executive orders, and then if you do a little detective work and read on the agency's website, you can kind of piece together what the new sort of priorities are. Now, is there a way to tell your story and your mission using those terms, fitting within that framework without fundamentally changing the work that you do? Now, depending on the work that you do, it might be possible. So maybe if you're working in domestic violence and your wording is really around DEI, disproportionate impacts, maybe the wording is about the work that we do affects everybody and mirroring some different kind of language like they have. Obviously, that's But I think it's important to probably have two case statements because when we're talking to about federal grants, maybe these priorities are changing, but when you're talking local grants, they might not. So I guess keeping that audience in mind, planning for different scenarios about if this gets cut, um, what are our options in diversifying funding. I think the hard reality is that in Nebraska, where a lot of us are, and I know folks are joining us from other states as well, the local funding landscape is never going to have the resources to replace all of the federal dollars that are coming into your community. So I think that diversification is important. It only goes so far. If 50% of your agency is federally funded, you're the reality is if that funding goes away, it's going to hurt. Um, and the Tanya kind of stressed that, and one thing that I took away from this is that this is really, in terms of communicating with your stakeholders, um, this is really kind of like an extinction level event for a lot of nonprofits. This is a really big deal. So making there's so much going on in the news. They're really flooding the zone with all of these different activities that it's easy to lose sight of things. And so really framing this as like, hey, this is comparable to what nonprofit sector went through during COVID or through the great, recession and getting people, your stakeholders sort of educated and educating yourself about it and then talking to your funders about kind of what's going on. So those were kind of the takeaways that I had from Tanya's presentation. Oh, and I did one other as well. Werner's presentation is worth a watch. I didn't find it as in depth as the first one, but one thing that I really did take away is there she gives you a couple of options that you can do if you think that you're going to be challenged on a grant, you can proactively kind of request budget and scope revisions. You can request no cost extensions to try to get through kind of this time. So if you get a chance to watch that one, she definitely I found that to be helpful for some of our grants to as we look at the scope, but also when you pull up that original NOFO, that funding opportunity, and then go back and look at the authorizing statute that caused that funding opportunity to come into existence. That is a law in most cases, right? And it's on the books. And so that gives you some verbiage you can use to say, okay, this funding came from this authorizing statute, and here's why this law was passed. Here's what it set out to do. Now, that might be in conflict with some of the wording from the executive orders, but it is a solid thing that exists out there in law that you can reference when you're talking to your other stakeholders about why the work is important. And so I thought that that was helpful, sort of guidance, looking back at those authorizing statutes, and then if you're doing advocacy work, talking to your local politicians, if you're talking with support sort of agencies in your community. Having that sort of background information can be helpful to them to sort of remind them of the why these funding opportunities and how they came to be and why they exist. And then that will help with your sort of advocacy efforts around those. I think that early on, there's been a lot of thought of like, I don't want to put a target on my back. I'm not going to advocate. But I think that now, there's sort of like, well, we're already seeing that similar agencies are being targeted with this work, and so there's not as much to lose, and so people are kind of ramping up some of that, getting their talking points together from an advocacy perspective.
Thank you. So, yeah, that was a lot. So one thing I think
Introducing
is,
Noelle Haft.
oh no, we're fine.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm Noelle, and I just wanted to, now that we're kind of halfway through the presentation, just trying to, just as a recap, um, the point of this review, we are not by any means and maybe this should have been said up front, we are by no means experts on any of this. We are just fellow grant professionals like you who are trying to navigate this wacky world of federal upheaval. And, our whole idea was, I don't know about you, but my inbox has been inundated with different webinars, different ways that various organizations can capitalize on, trying to make, make something out of what it is that's trying to happen. We're all trying to make sense out of it. And so this was actually a trilogy. This series of videos that GPA National had put out was actually a trilogy series that all kind of worked together. So the content actually was pretty similar in a lot of ways, I think. The three, when I say a trilogy and there are 4 videos, that is because Tanya, Rachel, and Karen worked together and collaborating on this video trilogy of content. And so, yes, a lot of the content overlapped. And the reason I mention that is because this culminating video by Karen Norris pretty much builds on what the previous 2 presenters talked about in those presentations, and then decided to kind of almost give you like a schoolhouse rock for grant writers in terms of how it all fits together. So if you're not interested in learning the history behind the appropriation process, or the difference between U.S. code and CFR, then we can spare you the trouble, because she goes through a lot of that in like the hour and a half that she speaks. It is good content. If you need a refresher in like Public Admin 101, I highly recommend it. But one thing I will say is that the main consideration that she is recommending to all of the grant professionals who watch the video reiterates and harkens back to what Ben and Kevin had mentioned from the previous 2 presenters, which is to know your regulations, know the specific language. She doesn't get so much into the like different recommendations, like in the weeds in terms of how to tie together your language, your specific language, into whatever the language of the statute is. But the overarching theme, I think, for all 3 of these videos, all 4 of them really, is that knowledge is power. And right now, I feel like we're all probably feeling a little bit powerless, in the sense like, what do we do? I mean, we've got a president who is changing everything. And kind of what I did find interesting is that at first, if you're only listening to the mainstream media, is that you're thinking he's doing that. This feels really willy-nilly. One thing I can tell you after watching this video and the one by Scott Scheffler is that this is all very much according to the law, and there are lots of loopholes, and they are finding every single one of them to make happen what they're trying to make happen. So guess what? We can do that too. And that, I think, is the big overarching piece of empowerment I got from these 2 videos. So when it comes to the considerations, you guys can read the slide. A lot of them don't say anything new that Ben didn't already go over, but it does some of the it all comes from a historical lens, like why